My best friend asked me for $120,000. I transferred it that Sunday. By Monday, the calls stopped. I found my name removed from everything. I used to believe that loyalty was enough, that if you poured yourself into someone completely, if you gave them your time and your trust and your energy and your money, they would protect that. They would honor it. They would see what you were offering and understand the weight of it. I was 22 when I first believed that. I was 34 when I found out how wrong I was. His name was Marcus. He was my best friend for 12 years. 12 years of phone calls at midnight, of sitting across from each other in tiny offices eating food we could barely afford, of building something from nothing together. He was the person I called the night my father died. He was the person who drove 4 hours to sit with me when I couldn't speak. He was the person I trusted more than anyone I had ever known. And he was the same person who, on a cold Tuesday morning, drained every cent I had ever saved, removed my name from everything we built together, and walked away like none of it had ever happened. $120,000. 6 years of my savings. 6 years of choosing the company over vacations, over comfort, over 100 small things I told myself I would have later. Gone in a single wire transfer on a Sunday morning while I was still asleep. But here's the thing about Marcus. He knew me for 12 years. He knew how I worked. He knew how I thought. What he never understood was this. I don't chase people who betray me. I don't beg. I don't fall apart on social media. I don't send the angry message. That feels good for 10 seconds and destroys your case for 10 years. I go quiet. I get organized. And then I build something so airtight that when I finally move, there's no counter-argument. By the time Marcus was celebrating in his new office with his new investors and his new logo, I was already sitting across from a lawyer, already building the case, already 3 steps ahead of everything he thought he had planned. Before I tell you what Marcus did, I need to tell you who I was before it happened. Because that version of me matters. That version of me is the one who built everything that Marcus tried to take. And that version of me is the one who eventually took it all back. I grew up in a small house in the Midwest. My parents were not wealthy. My father worked double shifts for most of my childhood. My mother kept the household, running on a budget so tight that I learned from a very young age the difference between wanting something and earning something. We didn't talk about money in our house the way some families do. We didn't have the kind of money the kids talked about. But we had principles. We had the understanding that if you wanted something real, you built it yourself. Nobody was coming to hand it to you. Nobody owed you a shortcut. If you wanted the life you imagined, you sat down, you figured out the steps, and you took them one at a time. That is what I did. From the time I was 15 years old and working weekends at a local shop, I saved everything. Not most of it, everything. I lived below my means for so long that it became part of my identity. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I had a vision, a specific vision, not just a job, not just a salary. I wanted to own something, a company, a brand, a name on a door that I had built myself. That dream was the engine of everything I did. It was the reason I took the right classes in college. It was the reason I chose the right first job. It was the reason I said yes when a young man named Marcus walked up to me at a company event and said, with that enormous laugh of his, that he had an idea that was going to change everything. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of the best and worst chapter of my life. And I would not trade either one of them, not even the worst part, because the worst part is what made me who I am now. Let me tell you about Marcus, because if I am going to tell this story honestly, I have to tell you who he actually was, not the version that betrayed me. The full version, the one I knew before the last chapter. Marcus was one of the most gifted people I've ever met, and I do not say that lightly. He had an ability to read a room that I have never seen in anyone else to this day. He could walk into a meeting with 10 people who had never met him, and within 20 minutes, every single one of them would feel like his closest friend. Not because he was fake, That is the thing that made it so disorienting when everything happened. He was not a cold person running a calculated act. He was genuinely warm, genuinely funny, genuinely present when he was with you. He made people feel seen. He made people feel like their ideas mattered. He made you feel, when you were around him, like the best version of yourself was not just possible but inevitable. That is a rare quality. And it is also, as I came to understand, an extraordinarily dangerous one. Because a person who can make everyone feel safe is a person who knows exactly how to use that feeling. We met at 22, same company, same floor. The kind of entry-level job that everyone takes right out of college while they figure out what they actually want to do. Marcus figured it out faster than anyone. He was never going to stay at a corporate job. He was always building towards something bigger. I could see it in the way he moved through the world. He was never fully present in any job he had because part of his mind was always somewhere else, planning, imagining, calculating what came next. We started talking, really talking, the kind of conversations that start at lunch and end up lasting 3 hours, because neither of you notices the time passing. We talked about ideas, about the businesses we were going to build, about the kind of freedom that only comes from owning something yourself, about what it would feel like to wake up one day and know that the thing you spent your life building was real and it was yours. Those conversations were some of the best of my life, and I meant every single word I said in them. I believed Marcus did too. I was not wrong about that, not in the beginning. What I was wrong about was what happens to some people when the dream they shared with you finally becomes close enough to touch. Some people, when success gets real, hold on tighter to the people who got them there. And some people, when success gets real, start looking at those same people as obstacles. We talked about starting a company for almost 3 years before we actually did it. 3 years of planning on napkins and in notes, apps and in long phone calls on Sunday afternoons. 3 years of researching the market, refining the idea, calculating what we would need and when we would need it and how we would get there. And during those 3 years, something happened that I did not fully appreciate at the time. We became each other's entire support system for this dream. My other friends did not fully understand what I was trying to build. My family was supportive but cautious in the way that families are when someone they love is about to take a risk. But Marcus understood. He not only understood, he shared it. He was in it with me completely, or so I believed. When we finally launched, I was 27 years old and I had never been more terrified or more alive. We had a name, a website, a service offering, and enough savings between us to survive for about 8 months if nothing worked. Everything was on the line, and I want to be honest about what those first months felt like because I think a lot of people romanticize the beginning of a business, and that is not what it was. It was brutal. It was rejection after rejection. It was proposals that took us 2 weeks to write being dismissed in 2 minutes. It was clients who seemed interested and then went quiet. It was weeks where I would sit at my desk at 11 at night looking at a spreadsheet that made no sense and thinking, what am I doing? What have I done? Is any of this real? And Marcus, to his credit, then was everything during those months. He was the one who pulled me back when I started to spiral. He was the one who said, one more call, one more proposal, one more attempt before we give up. He was the energy in the room when I had none left. Year 1, we brought in $90,000, not enough to pay ourselves well, but enough to prove the model worked. Year 2, we crossed $260,000. Year 3, we crossed $500,000 in revenue. We had done it. The company we had planned in phone calls and coffee shops and late nights was real. It was profitable. It was growing. And for a while, it felt exactly like we had always imagined it would feel, until it didn't. Cracks in something rarely announce themselves. That is the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. You think you will know it when you see it. You think there will be a moment so obvious that no one could miss it. That is not how it works. What actually happens is much quieter. A meeting you weren't told about. A contract that came back already signed when you were supposed to review it first. A phone call that stopped the moment you walked into the room. A shift in the language from we to I, so gradual you almost don't notice it until one day you realize that the word we has disappeared entirely, and you cannot remember exactly when it happened. I noticed the cracks. I noticed them and I told myself they meant nothing because I trusted Marcus. 12 years of trust is a powerful thing. It makes you rationalize. It makes you extend benefit of the doubt past the point where doubt has been clearly earned. I kept working. I kept building. I kept showing up every single day for a company that was, quietly and carefully and deliberately, being taken from me. And then came the afternoon Marcus sat across from me at our original conference table and said 4 words that I would hear in my sleep for the next year. He said, "I have an idea." The idea, as Marcus presented it, was elegant. That was what made it so effective. It was not a wild scheme. It was not something obviously suspicious. It was the kind of idea that made complete sense when you heard it from someone you trusted completely. He wanted to create a second brand, a premium tier of our existing services. Same infrastructure, same team, but a higher unclient profile and a significantly higher price point. He had been researching it for months, he said. He had identified the gap in the market. He had already had preliminary conversations with a few potential clients who were interested. All we needed was capital to move fast, before someone else identified the same opportunity and got there first. He laid it out over about 40 minutes. Charts, projections, a timeline. He had clearly put real work into the presentation, and as I sat there listening, I felt that familiar feeling that Marcus always generated in me. That sense of forward motion, that conviction that we were building something important. He was good at making things feel inevitable. He always had been. And then he told me the number, $120,000. I remember the silence that followed that number. I remember sitting very still and looking at him and feeling something shift in my stomach that I could not name. $120,000 was not just a number to me. It was 6 years of disciplined, careful, deliberate saving. Every trip I had not taken, every upgrade I had not made, every small luxury I had told myself to wait on. It was the emergency fund, the retirement account, everything. All of it compressed into one number. I said, "Marcus, that is everything I have." And he looked at me with that look he always had when he believed in something completely. He leaned forward. He said, "That is exactly why it will work. Because we have always been all in. That is what got us here. That is what is going to take us to the next level. I want you to think about what it feels like to sit across from your best friend of 12 years, the person who drove 4 hours when your father died, the person who has never in 12 years given you any real reason not to trust them, and hear those words. I want you to understand that the decision I made was not naive. It was the decision that any reasonable person with 12 years of evidence would have made." I said yes. I signed the agreement that Friday. I transferred the money that Sunday morning. I remember exactly how I felt after I hit send on the transfer. Lighter somehow, like I had taken a real step towards something real. I made coffee. I sat by the window. I thought about what the next chapter was going to look like. I had no idea that I had just made the most consequential mistake of my life. And I had no idea that before the week was over, Marcus would stop answering my calls. He did not disappear all at once. I want to be precise about this because I think people imagine betrayal as a single dramatic moment. A door slamming, a phone thrown across a room, one final confrontation where everything is said. That is not what happened. What happened was a disappearance. So gradual that for the first week, I genuinely believed it was stress, that he was overwhelmed by the launch of the new project. But the silence was temporary. Week 1, he was around but distracted. Calls going to voicemail, texts answered hours late with short replies. He said things were moving fast. He said to give him time. I gave him time. Week 2, the responses slowed further. I had questions about ongoing clients, about contracts that needed signatures, about decisions that required both of us. He would answer some of them eventually in messages that said as little as possible. He missed 2 meetings. Canceled a third. I told myself it was the pressure of launching something new. I told myself I knew what he looked like under pressure, and this was it. Week 3, the messages stopped entirely. I called. Voicemail, I texted. Delivered but not read. I emailed. Nothing. I drove to the office on a Thursday morning, early the way I always did. His desk was empty. Not messy empty the way it got. When he was busy, empty, empty. The plants he kept by the window were gone. The framed photo from our first client pitch was gone. The coffee mug with the company logo that he had from the beginning was gone. I stood in the doorway of his office for a long time, and then I walked to my own desk, sat down, opened the company management portal, typed in my login, pulled up the organizational records, and searched my own name. Director, removed. Shareholder, removed. Signatory, removed. Co-founder, removed. I read those words several times. I read them the way you read something in a foreign language, slowly and carefully, hoping that the meaning will become different the longer you look at it. It did not become different. Every record of my existence in the company I had spent 6 years building had been systematically removed. The only thing that remained was my email address on an invoice from 14 months ago. That was all that was left of me. I closed the portal. I sat very still. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not do the thing that every part of me wanted to do, which was to get in my car and drive to wherever Marcus was and demand an explanation. Instead, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I started writing down everything I could remember, every date, every conversation, every transaction, every signature, every meeting, every file, because something in me, something quiet and very certain, already knew what was coming next. And that part of me knew that what I did in the next 48 hours would determine everything that followed. I want to talk about what it actually felt like, because I think when people hear a story like this, they imagine the shock, the anger, the righteous indignation, and those things were there. But underneath all of them was something quieter and much harder to carry: grief, real grief. The kind that does not announce itself loudly but settles into the bones of your daily life and changes the texture of everything. I grieved the money. Of course I did. $120,000 is not an abstraction. It is years of your actual life. Every late night in the office when you could have been somewhere else. Every sacrifice translated into a number. Watching that number disappear does something to you that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it, but the money was almost secondary to the other grief. The grief over Marcus, over 12 years, over every memory I now had to hold differently. When you are betrayed by someone you trusted completely, every memory becomes a suspect. You go back through all of it, looking for the moment when the real person was visible beneath the performance. You wonder when it started. You wonder if the friendship was ever real or if it was always, on some level, a long game. You lie awake at 3 a.m. asking yourself what you missed, what you should have seen, what you chose not to see. I did all of that for weeks. And then something shifted. I cannot tell you exactly when it happened. There was no single morning where I woke up and decided to stop grieving and start fighting. It was more gradual than that. But slowly, underneath the grief, something else to grow, something harder and quieter and much more useful. It was the part of me that had built a company from nothing. The part that had sat in a tiny apartment with a dream and turned it into $500,000 in revenue. The part that had been choosing discipline over comfort for her entire adult life. That part of me looked at what Marcus had done and said, clearly and without emotion, "This is not over. He made a mistake. He was careless. And I'm going to find." The most important decision I made in the entire story is also the one that went against every instinct I had. I chose silence. Not forever, not passively, but strategically and deliberately. I chose not to react in the way that every cell in my body was demanding. My first instinct, the one I had to actively override every single day for the first 2 weeks, was to tell everyone, to call our mutual contacts, to post something, to send Marcus a message that captured exactly what he had done and exactly what I thought of it. And I want to be honest with you about why I didn't. It was not because I was afraid. It was not because I thought there was still a way to salvage the friendship. It was because my mother told me something when I was 17 years old that I have never forgotten. She said, "Never let the person who hurt you see how badly they hurt you. Because the moment they see your pain, they have power over you. And the moment they lose the ability to see your pain, they have nothing." I thought about that. And I thought about something else. If Marcus had planned this, and the more I looked at the evidence, the clearer it became that this was deeply planned. Then he was waiting for me to react. He was expecting the angry calls, the social media post, the dramatic confrontation. He knew me well enough to know that my first instinct was to fight openly. And if I fought openly, I would make mistakes. I would say things that could be used against me. I would show my hand before I had all my cards. So I went quiet. I told 2 people, my closest friend who I swore to secrecy, and eventually a lawyer. Everyone else got the version of me that was simply moving forward, focused, composed, because I had something far more useful than anger. I had documentation. I had always kept everything, every email, every contract, every meeting note, every bank record. I had a digital paper trail going back 6 years, and I was about to spend every free hour I had going through every single piece of it. I spent 3 weeks going through everything I had. I printed emails and organized them chronologically. I highlighted key phrases, key dates, key decisions. I mapped every bank transfer against every signed agreement. I created a timeline on my wall that started 6 years back and moved forward month by month. And as I built that timeline, the picture that emerged was more deliberate than anything I had initially imagined. Marcus had registered a new business entity 11 months before he asked me for money. 11 months. While we were having lunch together every week, while he was telling me about his plans for our company, while he was sitting at our shared conference table going through quarterly numbers with me, he'd already quietly filed the paperwork for a company that was designed to replace ours. The meetings I had not been invited to were meetings with a new attorney, building the legal structure of his exit. The contracts that had come back already signed were client relationships being quietly migrated away from our partnership and toward his new entity. The conversations about the next phase, the restructuring, the new direction that he had mentioned in vague terms over the preceding months, all of it was laying the groundwork. He had been building his escape for nearly a year before he made his move. And the move, the request for money, the transfer, the disappearance, it was not the beginning of the betrayal. It was the final step. The money was not even primarily about the money. The money was about leaving me with nothing to fight back with. No capital, no resources, no ability to mount a legal challenge. He had thought of everything, almost. Because what Marcus had not accounted for, what he had underestimated in the way that people who think they are the smartest person in the room always do, was the original partnership agreement we had signed 6 years earlier, a document from the very beginning of our company, a document that contained a standard IP clause, the kind of clause that lawyers include in every partnership agreement and that most founders sign and then never think about again. Any intellectual property, any methodology, any client framework, any work product developed under the partnership belonged to both parties, regardless of which entity it was subsequently used in or transferred to. His new company was built entirely on our shared methodology, our service framework, our client acquisition process, our internal systems, all of it developed during our partnership, all of it covered by that clause, all of it legally, at least partially, still mine. I found that document at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday. I sat with it for a long time, and then I picked up my phone and sent one message to a lawyer named Claire. I said, I need to meet with you. I think I have a case that Claire had been in business litigation for 15 years. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She was the kind of person who, when you sat across from her, made you feel like the problem you were describing had already been solved, and she was simply waiting for you to finish, explaining it so she could tell you how. I had been referred to her by a contact. I'm going to tell you what that moment felt like. Not because it was triumphant. It did not feel triumphant. It felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in weeks. Like after weeks of free-falling, something had finally caught me. Not luck, not chance, preparation. 6 years of keeping every document, a habit I had built not out of paranoia but out of discipline. The same discipline that had built the company in the first place, that discipline was the thing that saved me. And I want you to hear that clearly. Because people hear stories like this and they think the lesson is about revenge, about fighting back, about not letting people walk over you. Those things are true. But the deeper lesson, the one that actually changed the outcome, was a habit I built long before any of this happened. Keep everything, every email, every contract, every record, not because you expect to be betrayed, but because when you are, and at some point in your life you will be, you will want to be the person in the room with the most paper. Claire laid out the strategy over 2 sessions. She was methodical in a way I found deeply reassuring. There were no shortcuts. No dramatic gestures. Every step was calculated, documented, and executed in a specific order for specific reasons. The first step was to complete the documentation. Not just what I had, but everything that could be verified externally. Bank records, company filings, publicly available business registration documents. The interview Marcus had given where he had described, almost word for word, a methodology I had written, and that was covered by our partnership agreement. Claire highlighted that interview in red when she saw it. She said he gave us a gift. The second step was to build the ownership argument. This meant working through every piece of IP that Marcus's new company was using and tracing it back to its origin. When was it created? Under which entity? Who had contributed to its development? What did the original agreements say about it? This was meticulous work and it took time, but every piece of it was traceable because I had kept everything. The third step, the one I want you to understand carefully, because it is the step that changed everything, was to approach his investors, not publicly, not aggressively, quietly, through certified legal correspondence. The investors who had put money into Marcus's company had done so based on representations he had made about what he owned, what Claire's letter informed them of, with documentation attached. Was that the core intellectual property and methodology of that company was legally contested? That there was a co-founder agreement with an IP clause that applied directly to the business model they had invested in, that proceeding without resolving this ownership question would expose them to significant legal liability. Investors, in my experience, do not like surprises, and they do not like liability. The response came within 18 hours of the letters being received. All investment activity was paused pending legal review. And the fourth step, the final step, was to show up to the one meeting that Marcus had been building toward for months. His first major investor presentation, the day he had planned as his official arrival, the day he thought was the beginning of everything. That was the day we chose. And when that morning came, I was ready. While we were preparing, Marcus was doing what people who think they have won always do. He was celebrating. The new company had a launch party that I read about on LinkedIn, photos of a beautiful office, a team of people I did not recognize, a logo I recognized the design sensibility of because it was built on the same visual identity we had developed together. His announcement post talked about years of vision and the excitement of finally bringing something to life. It talked about building the kind of company that was designed to last. I read that post several times, not out of bitterness, with professional interest, because almost every phrase in it, every positioning choice, every description of the company's offering was traceable directly to documents I had written. He gave interviews in the weeks that followed. In one of them, a publication asked him to describe his company's proprietary methodology, and he did, in careful detail. He described a framework that I had spent 4 months developing, a framework that existed as a 50-page document in our shared drive, with my name in the header, and a creation date from 3 years before his company launched. Claire called me the night that the interview was published. She read me one paragraph from it. Then she said, "I want you to know that he just made this significantly easier." We sent the certified letters 2 days before his investor presentation. Claire had timed it deliberately, not early enough for him to prepare a response, not so late that the investors would not have time to read and process the documentation before the meeting. The timing was surgical. Within 18 hours, every lead investor paused their commitment pending legal review. His launch capital, the funding round he had spent 6 months building toward, was frozen. And he had no way of knowing what was coming next. He had no way of knowing that 48 hours later, at 9 in the morning in a glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor, I was going to walk through the door. The morning of his investor presentation, I woke up at 5. I did not set an alarm. I simply woke up. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and went through the folder one final time. Not because I needed to. I had memorized every page. I went through it because I wanted to feel the weight of it. 12 years of a friendship and 6 years of a business. Documented, organized, and ready. I arrived at the building at 8:45. Claire was already in the lobby. She had a coffee for me. We did not talk much in the elevator. There was not much to say. Everything that needed to be done had been done. The preparation was complete. The rest was simply showing up. The conference room was on the 12th floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. A long oval table with 10 chairs around it. 9 of them were already filled when we arrived. His investors. Most of them older, experienced. The kind of people who have seen enough to know when something is wrong. Marcus was at the head of the table, standing, talking to someone beside him. He was wearing the gray suit, the one he wore for important meetings. I noticed because I had seen him wear it enough times to know what it meant. He was confident. He was ready. He had prepared for this moment for months. He turned when the door opened. The first 2 seconds were the most honest. I had seen him in a long time. Confusion. He could not immediately understand why I was here. Then recognition. He knew, in the way that people who have done something know, when what they have done finally arrives in the room, and then something settled over his face that I had genuinely never seen there. In 12 years of knowing him, it was not anger, it was not defiance, it was something quieter and far more revealing. It was the look of a person who realizes, fully and completely, the thing they thought they had escaped has been following them the entire time. I did not make a speech. I did not raise my voice. I did not do anything that could be characterized as dramatic or emotional or unprofessional. I walked to the table. I placed the folder in front of the lead investor. I slid it across the table, and then I looked at Marcus, and I said, quietly and without any particular emphasis, as though I were commenting on the weather, "You should have read what you signed, Marcus." The room was completely silent. The kind of silence that has texture. The investor in front of the folder opened it, began reading. His expression did not change, but his posture did. He read a page, turned it, passed a document to his left. The next investor read it, passed it on. Marcus opened his mouth. I watched him. He had always been good with words. 12 years of watching him talk, his way through difficult situations, had given me a very accurate read of what he looked like when he was about to say something effective. He did not look like that. He looked like someone who had run out of road. He closed his mouth. The documents traveled around the table in silence, and when the last investor had read what was in front of them, the lead investor looked up at Claire and said, "We will need to pause this meeting." Claire nodded. Said, "Of course." She handed him her card. We gathered our copies, and we left. I did not look at Marcus as we walked out, not because I was afraid to, but because there was nothing left to see. The documents had said everything. The legal process took 5 months. I will not pretend that 5 months is short. It is not. There were difficult weeks. Weeks where the outcome felt uncertain, where Marcus contested things I had not expected, where the process moved more slowly than I could bear, but Claire was steady, methodical, and the documentation was airtight. At the end of 5 months, the investors withdrew their funding entirely. The co-founder agreement was enforced. 50% ownership of the intellectual property and client frameworks that Marcus had transferred to his new company was returned to me. $120,000 was recovered, with 8 months of applicable interest. Marcus's company dissolved approximately 4 months after the resolution. I did not cause that dissolution. The withdrawal of investor funding caused it. The legal cloud over the IP caused it. The simple reality that a company built on a dishonest foundation cannot sustain itself under scrutiny caused it. I did not destroy Marcus. I simply took back what was mine. And what was mine, it turned out, was enough to rebuild on. I'm going to tell you what I want you to take from this story. Not because I think my experience is universal, but because I know that somewhere, right now, someone is sitting in the middle of something that feels like the end. A betrayal. A loss. A moment where the ground disappeared and has not come back yet. I want to talk directly to that person. The version of you that is awake at 3 a.m. asking if you will ever feel solid again. Yes, you will. But I want to be honest with you about how it is not time. I know that is what everyone says, and I know how hollow it sounds when you are in the middle of it. Time does not heal betrayal. What heals betrayal is action, specific, measured. What you say, but what you do not say. The person who reacts first. Who makes the public statement? Who sends the angry message? Almost always hands their opponent something useful. Do not hand your opponent anything. Go quiet, organize, think. Move when you are ready, not when your emotions are loudest. And the third thing, the one I want to leave you with, is this. What happened to me was not a story about revenge. I want to be very clear about that. Revenge is emotional. It is about making someone feel what you felt. It is about punishment. What I did was not revenge. It was consequence. There is a profound difference. Consequence is not about them. It is about returning the world to its correct state. It is about standing in a room with documentation in your hand and saying, calmly and without drama, you should have read what you signed, and then letting the paper do the rest. Marcus did not just take my money. He built a company on a foundation that was never fully his. And that is the final thing I want you to understand. You cannot build anything real on something stolen. You can run fast. You can rebrand. You can stand in a beautiful office and give interviews about your vision, but underneath all of it, the foundation is wrong. And foundations built on stolen ground do not hold. They never hold. They always, eventually, fall. I am standing here today with my company, my name, my frameworks, and everything I built. Marcus is not. I did not destroy him. The truth did, and all I had to do was show up with it.